There's no question the Irish community has left an indelible mark on Birmingham. It's a city whose St Patrick's Day parade is rivalled only by New York, where over 2,000 children play Gaelic football every week, and it's home to Britain's very first Irish quarter. But it hasn't always been like this. Before 1974, the Irish community was a vibrant part of Birmingham life. After all, they'd helped to rebuild the city after the Second World War. But when 2 bombs exploded in Birmingham pubs in November, everything changed.
There was an awful lot of anti-Irish feeling, if you like. We all knew the real hatred that was going around, certainly at the time of the bombings and the fear that brought with it. My family went through 4 months of having phone calls which were very threatening. So there was a real genuine fear.
To be Irish was to be a suspect in Birmingham in 1974. Anti-Irish marches were staged. A young family's home was petrol bombed.
At Erdington on Friday, we went to do my shopping. Couldn't get served in the paper shop.
Really?
She wouldn't serve the girl behind the counter. There's an English woman behind, I think she was a Brummie woman. She said we get priority.
How do you feel about that sort of reaction?
Well, I don't mind that I can put up with that, but I can't put up with throwing petrol bombs through your windows, you know.
Even for those injured in the Birmingham pub bombings, anti-Irish feelings were too hard to bear.
My father was Irish, and obviously got family that was Irish, and the way they were treated was not very nice. Why I think it was so difficult and so awful was that all the Irish people of Birmingham were blamed. There was a lady whose sons were also killed in the pub bombings, and a few days later she went to the bakery and they wouldn't serve her because she was Irish. It's just horrendous.
It's strange to think that to be Irish could be anything other than to be welcomed in Birmingham. To not be served in pubs, to not be served in bakeries, to be sent home early from work just for being Irish, it just feels alien. But it happened, and now some members of the Irish community are worried that it's happening all over again, only this time, not to them. Since September the 11th and 7/7, attitudes and headlines about the Muslim community have been increasingly negative and damaging. As was the case with the Irish of the 1970s, those headlines don't always tell the full story. This new wave of prejudice has caused members of the Irish community to speak out in defence of the Muslim population. It's a defence which the Muslim community needs.
Just after 9/11, and one man actually did spit on me whilst I had my young child with me. And they'd actually been reading newspapers, you know, looking at the atrocities that had happened. And the grief and the anger was very much then projected onto people like myself who are associated, whether we like it or not, with terrorism.
Is there a misperception of Muslims or Islam in the media at the moment, do you think, Salma?
I can't explain the feeling of dread, you know, when you switch on the TV, when you're going to hear the news, what is it going to be now? And it seems there's always one controversy after another, whether it's the niqab or whether it's faith schools. It's always something to do with problematising Muslims, that we're sinister or a threat. And it kind of gets hard to keep saying, no, we're not like that. There are many parallels as communities that we've been through in terms of the Irish community, having to take the stick, as it were, for the actions of a few people. In the same way, the Muslim community as a whole has also been demonised and is going through that process.
Comparisons between the Irish and Muslim experiences at times of trouble don't just end there. There are amazing parallels between terrorism legislation brought in after the 1974 IRA attacks and that of legislation brought in
after 9/11.
86% of people arrested under the terrorism acts of the 70s were later released without charge. Likewise, only a small fraction of those detained under new terror legislation have actually been convicted.
The police told us from the start that they knew we hadn't done it. They told us they didn't care who done it. They told us that we were selected and that they were going to frame us just to keep people in there happy.
As one of 6 men wrongly convicted of the Birmingham pub bombings, Paddy Hill knows what it is to be on the receiving end of a miscarriage of justice supplied to a suspect community.
When 9/11 happened, I said then the Muslim community was the next victims, and I've been telling people that the one thing they should not do is to allow it to happen to the Muslim community what they allowed to happen to the Irish community in the 70s. They allowed the Irish community to be isolated. Nobody wanted to talk to the Irish. When they heard the Irish accent, they wouldn't even serve you in pubs, and what have you. Unfortunately, the Muslims haven't got that, because you can tell by the colour of their skin, so they're already handicapped. And I've been telling people since 2002, please don't walk away from the Muslim community. You've got to stand by them, because if you don't, who are they going to pick on next?
Paddy Hill spent time in prison for a crime he didn't commit, as did Birmingham's Moazzam Begg, who was detained in Guantanamo Bay for 3 years.
For me, I was imprisoned, unable to communicate with my family or to meet with my family, to see the youngest child of mine who was born whilst I was in captivity, and literally being in a situation where I'm unable to dictate anything that happens at all.
But surely it's not the aim of the authorities to divide communities with these laws. Aren't they just trying to protect a public under threat?
The stick that we're all being beaten with is the very terrible one of September the 11th, that this is in the name of national security and protecting civilians and military from terrorism. The reality is, though, we already know in this country, in Britain for example, when internment took place at the time of the Irish Troubles, that it only bred terrorism, antipathy and hostility between communities. I've seen reports within the Irish Times and other Irish newspapers about how they see the mirror and the parallel of the demonization of suspect communities, which both the Irish Catholic community and the Muslim community have become or have been at some point.
Considering the prejudice and injustice against the Irish in the 70s, you'd hope things might have changed.
The Irish parallel is an interesting one because there's been a lot of similarities, but there's room for hope because we can see how things have changed, and the Irish community certainly are very much more at ease and are not stigmatised for being Irish anymore. And I very much hope that the Muslims will experience the same thing.
The Irish community is now thriving again in Birmingham, but it took almost 20 years for them to do so. How long is it going to take before the city's Muslim community is able to do the same?
The media play a great part. They whip up and stir up hatred, anti-Muslim feeling, the same as the anti-Irish feeling, the way they report things. I've been telling the ordinary people of this country, please rally round the Muslim people. Don't allow them to become isolated.